Welcome to the Mies Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Mies, the culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, I'll be interviewing world-class entrepreneurs in the food space that are shifting the paradigm of how we innovate and operate in our industry. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Yo, they say art mirrors life with every stroke of the pencil. I'm giving you folks a glimpse into my experiences. You could trace.
My guest today is Austrian-born chef Markus Glocker. Markus has one of the most incredible pedigrees as a chef you could imagine. From a young age, he worked in the hotel his family ran near the Danube in Austria in his aunt's kitchen. And he knew pretty much right away, working there, that he was going to dedicate the rest of his life to the craft of cooking. He left for culinary school and then spent some time cooking for some pretty incredible chefs like Eckhart Ritzeben in Berlin, then back to Vienna before heading to the US to work for chefs Charlie Trotter and then Gordon Ramsay at the London Hotel, where they received 2 Michelin stars during his time as a chef there. Markus then went to partner with Drew Nieperon in New York City to open Batard in Tribeca, where he earned a James Beard for Best New Restaurant in America. And he recently opened up Koloman in the Ace Hotel in New York. It's open to rave reviews. I've been there. It's really delicious, and it's been packed ever since. Markus has this commitment to excellence that always reminds me of the late Chef Ray Kuntz whenever I eat his food. It's so pristine and beautiful, and it's friggin' delicious too. He and I have become friends over the years and had a lot of fun cooking together. But what many people might not know is that in addition to being a really talented chef, he's also a pretty incredible musician. The first time I heard him jam out on an electric piano one night, he didn't say anything before he started, and the whole room was just like, what just happened? And I think it just goes to show that anything that he does really well. And I think music has influenced a lot of how he cooks as well. So we had a great conversation. We talked about the state of kitchens, involving your team and innovation, how experience working in hotels can shape you as a chef, and a lot more. So I hope you enjoy. Markus, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
It's been a while since I've seen you in person. I don't know when the last time it was, but I miss eating your food outside of the restaurants as well as in the restaurants.
It's been a while, yeah. But we're also busy, no?
Yeah, I know, man. Well, you were just in Austria, right?
Yeah, I was in Austria for about 10 days. A little bit of family time, but as well as exploring some dining destinations in Munich and Austria, in general, Salzburg and Vienna. It was quite fantastic, yeah.
What were some of the highlights?
What I always do is when I go to Europe, I fly into Munich. I used to work there. It's just really great to fly into Munich, get Weisswurst sausage in the morning, a little beer with some friends and ease in. And then I normally rent a car and then I drive down to Austria. This time I was visiting one of my old chefs, Eckhart Ritzeben, who used to be back in time the first 3-star chef ever in Germany as an Austrian.
Yeah, Tantris
and aubergine, yeah. So he's now 86 or 87 years old. He lives at a lake called Tegernsee. And, I just visited him. I brought him a bottle of champagne and we chatted and it was quite nice to see him. But he's getting old. But that was definitely...
What is he doing now?
He's still the patron for Hangar 7. I don't know if you're familiar with that from Red Bull.
We did some work with them with Kuntz back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. He was there as well, yeah. So he's still doing that. But besides that, he's more or less doing cookbooks and a little consulting. But he's wants to enjoy his life now.
I bet. Yeah, 80 some odd things still going strong. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so I was at the lake there. We went to the local fisherman there, had some smoked fish and some drinks. And then we drove down to Austria. I saw family and started the culinary journey. When I first landed in Munich, I went to a place called Jan Hartwig. I don't know if you're familiar with the place. Jan is an incredible chef. He got 3 stars at a place 2 years ago. And then he sort of left and opened his own restaurant. Actually, yesterday, Michelin came out in Germany, and with the new place, he got 3 stars right out of the gate. Pretty impressive.
Wow, that's nuts.
I had his food. It was 3 stars all the way. There's no error. There is rarely eaten like this in my life where we say it was so well thought out, it was so well seasoned and so well prepared that everything was right. It's pretty hard to do.
Well, also like right out the gate. Getting 3 stars the minute you open is nuts.
I went there with 2 chefs, 2 chef friends, and everybody said the same thing. That's pretty incredible.
How long were you there for in Austria?
I was there about 10 days. My father wasn't so well, so the trip was mainly for family. But I had to see some friends as well. They put everything together in one trip.
Wow, I'm sorry to hear, man. Is he feeling better? Or?
Nothing major. It's all good. It's just, I'm always in the US as well. I'm now rarely home if life happens. So I try to spend a little bit more time home with family as much as possible.
It sounds like you get home about as often as I do. So, and my
Yep.
family's in Virginia. I think your background's pretty well known. So I want to sort of jump into Koloman and your vision behind it, why you opened it. I remember hearing you talk about your vision for sort of a Viennese cafe and, of course, then applying Markus Glocker's pristine touch to it. But what's the vision behind it and why'd you open it?
I was envisioning a restaurant which is not just like going for 3 stars and like doing what I did before in my career, which I love. Don't get me wrong, the fine dining aspect of all of that. But what I missed in a lot of ways was like the liveliness of a restaurant while still doing excellent food and wine, and has a story as well, and the connection with it, The connection was with me, obviously, through Austria, the food I love, but the food itself was always a little bit too casual for me. So I wanted to put that into context with a well thought out wine list, a design which features, sort of an Austrian element as well. And then obviously the food, which has my fingerprint on it, but not as a chef to, hey, look at me, this is all the food I can put on a plate and it's really elaborate and difficult to understand. I wanted to have something familiar, great flavors, and the technique is hidden behind. So you taste it, there's something different, but you not necessarily see it on the plate, sort of an accessibility for the restaurant. And all those thoughts I had for a long time. And then when the space came around the Breslin, I thought it's the right space because the high ceilings, all that design elements we wanted to put into a restaurant was actually fitting really well in that space, which is rarely happening as well. It's not as easy to, you think, in New York City to find the right space for the right design as well. So everything fits. So that was sort of the idea about Koloman. And, I didn't have a name for the restaurant. At that point, I had a name which was called VN. I wanted to call the restaurant actually VN at the beginning, but then we all agreed that's not the most prestigious name for a restaurant, like it's too on the nose. So then we explored with a branding company a couple of different options, and the name Koloman came up, and artist and design and interior design special. And then we jumped on that name and got Koloman Moser as an inspiration for the design part of it. And, one thing to another, we got Katja Schanauer, our wine team as well from Le Bernardin. And this was another missing link we put together. He had this beautiful wine list and approach to casual elegance, sort of.
Yeah. By the way, you guys are in service right now, right?
No, actually not. Is it too loud?
No. It's good. I'm just curious. Are you doing lunch yet, or?
We're doing lunch yet, yeah. But we'll have lunch in about an hour. Yeah.
Oh, cool. So, I kind of wanted to talk a bit about like Austrian cuisine because there aren't a lot of Austrian restaurants. I mean, there's Valse, maybe Cafe Katja, like, at least in New York City. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot across the country, but like, to you, like, what is Austrian cuisine? Because it seems like you're definitely like a big supporter of it. You're trying to kind of tell more of a story around Austrian cuisine. Your restaurant is not like a full-on Austrian restaurant.
I wanted to avoid that as well, because I do think it's very difficult to have a full-on Austrian restaurant. The perception of Austrian food is still, I would say, a little bit more on the heavier side. It's pastry driven, but the food itself, the savory food, is not necessarily the most elegant and eloquent food you would imagine. So therefore, I wanted to have the French aspect going into the Austrian food. But look, Austrian food, I have a very strong connection since my mom was cooking pretty much every day fresh for us. We have 4 kids, or we are 4 kids. My dad came home in the break, I was working in the village. So it was fresh food all the time. And looking back, she cooked classic Austrian dishes all the time. And the workload which was going into that food is actually tremendous. So I grew up with all those classic dishes, and I all thought the flavors are so great. But I would say the looks of the plate, or like the elegance of the visual, is not there. So there was a lot of recipes or ideas from my background which I put in there. And I do think there was a couple of really great restaurants. Danube, for example, I'm sure you're familiar with, from David Bollé and Mario Loninger, which was, I think, that restaurant really set the tone for Austrian food, which is on a different level of elegance, I think.
Yeah. The dining room was stunning. Forgione is moving into that space now.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's a good move. It's a beautiful space.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's sort of the background for Austrian food for me. I always wanted to steer away in my younger years in cooking because, you want to do something new. You want to create your own style and all those kind of things. But getting older, you put things off the plate, and take it away and just focus more on the flavor profile of what you're familiar with, at least in my career. And now I'm landed to put those kind of flavors together with the techniques I learned over the years. It's more exciting than ever for me to beat off.
It's hard to work with Austrian cuisines, like some of those classic dishes, if you don't apply some of your background. With fine dining, the aesthetics are really tough.
Fully agree with that. That was actually our thought process when we first opened. We had to call dishes in a different way. You know, we had to write it different on menu in general that people understand it. We couldn't surprise them completely. You had to sort of, when you read the menu, you know there's something different, but it's not so different that you're going to send the dish back because this is not what I expected. So those kind of things were quite challenging, actually. Yeah, for sure. That was the biggest challenge for us. But we had the French aspect to it, so the French cuisine aspect to it made the menu much more accessible and more understanding as well.
Yeah. Are there dishes that you want to put on the menu? You know, for example, Kaiserschmarrn is not on the menu, and I that's one of my favorite things to eat.
No,
But are there dishes like that you want to put on the menu, and you need to like work through how to present them the right way? Or
yes, I mean, before I opened doors, I had a menu together, which was really elaborate. There's a lot of great desserts and a lot of technique. But as you know, when you open a restaurant, all of a sudden things move around and we got so busy as well. And then it's as well having control over certain things. The Kaiserschmarrn is a simple dish, but it's not that simple. If you make it nice, you're able to serve, let's say, 30 or 40.
mm-hmm.
And those kind of dishes for me is we have a lot of leisure guests, international guests, and a lot of Austrian and German guests as well. If I would serve this dish and it's not right, they're gonna slaughter me. You know, it's like making a burger and you're not gonna make the burger right. It's just there's no room for error. So that's why I chose not to put those kind of dishes on there yet. I will,
yeah,
but that's gonna be when we are in full swing.
Yeah, well, maybe we could just talk for a little bit about your process, how you like develop menus, because all your food from your time before Koloman and all the restaurant, Batard and prior to that, like all the restaurants you worked at, it's obviously very pristine. It's very thought through. I'd love to sort of dig into like, what's your process like when you're working on a menu or a new menu? How often are you making like broad sweep changes of the menu? Like, how do you iterate? When does something feel done? How do you involve your team? I'd love to sort of dig into that.
Yeah, that's great. I think to go back for a little bit, I think for I in our younger years, I'm sure you were quite similar in that perspective. It's just all about like getting this new dish on a menu, and like it's so cool and it's so elaborate, and we present it to our chefs, and they say, "Wow, it's a great dish," and then actually goes on the menu, and the whole kitchen falls apart because we can't execute it. Those things were the beginning stages of the way I put a dish together. But now I'm looking back, I still have great elements of that time when I presented dishes. But now I think more and more about how can we execute it properly? How can we put this in place? I mean, it sounds a little bit boring, but for me, the word consistency, it gets thrown around everywhere. But I always say you have to have a concept to open a restaurant, but I'm not necessarily call my restaurant a concept, but you need to have a concept, how you're going to put a dish together and how you're going to serve it for a broad audience than just 30, 40 people. That's my thought process behind it. I think when you have less ingredients on the plate, which I thrive for now more than ever, these ingredients need to be so spot on. There's no room for error. And that's why when I change menu items, I mostly do like specials. And when the specials are great, the way I feel it's ready, then I will put the dish in writing on the menu. And then we have a new dish on the menu. And this is a process of every 2 or 3 weeks. It's going to be 1 or 2 dishes. And while we're doing this, we are sort of always in the season. But I'm not a big believer of changing a whole menu 4 times a year because that's what you're supposed to do. Whoever comes when the menu is live the first week, they're not going to have the greatest meal.
I haven't heard that much, but that's really interesting. It's true. Yeah, when you wholesale change an entire menu every season, it takes time to get right, and you got to like work the kinks out in the kitchen and work every dish. Like, how long is it going to be, in that oven for? And the cook needs to sort of roll into their repertoire of the rest of the mise en place on their station. And it takes time to get that right. And I never heard anybody say that, but you're right. Like, yeah,
I think so too.
First guests that get that menu the first couple of weeks, you aren't going to have the same experience. That's really profound.
I'm sure it's good. I'm not saying it's completely wrong, but I'm sure it's just fantastic. But the thing is for me that the kitchen needs a little time to play ball with each other, to understand everything. And especially now, and our time, I think it's not that easy to find the staff and the level of back in the time. I mean, what did Grey Con say to you? We need a new dish, and well, you pulled it off. I don't think I can do this right now. I don't have that kind of skill level in the kitchen, that's the time we're in. However, I want to make sure that the end product is still the same.
Well, I want to talk about staff in a little bit, but just sort of digging a little bit more into what you were saying. It's interesting. You kind of put a box around how you create a dish, which is so smart because you're a creative, right? You're a chef. You could create anything in the world, and so starting with what can I execute consistently well in my kitchen as like the foundation of creating a new dish is really, really smart, and it's really the only way to succeed. I heard this notion from Matteo, the founder of Jasper Hill Creamery. He said something that scared me. He said, standardization is the enemy. And I was like, yeah, that's scary because we try to standardize things so that you make things the same way. But actually what he meant was that food, especially cheese, changes. It's not the same every day. The atmosphere changes, the environment changes, and you have to sort of nurture that. And Seamus and I had a chat a week or two ago, Seamus Mullen, and we were talking about consistency.
Yeah.
Consistency is vital in a kitchen, but they're actually different. The idea of being consistent with food is different from standardizing the dish.
Absolutely.
You have a salmon en croûte. That has to be consistently executed well. But salmon, clearly, like every piece of salmon that comes in is not the exact same piece of salmon. So you can't standardize it as a 4x4. You have to teach the cook how to prepare that based on your vision. And that notion of consistency is, I think that's probably, I don't know how you feel about this, but it's probably one of the most important jobs of a chef.
Absolutely. I mean, when everybody says consistency in the kitchen, everybody thinks like, oh, we got to do the same menu all the time. It's not the case. The case is the consistency comes, are you going to show up on time? Is your station set up every day the same way? It's not about the actual dish that you're going to put the same menu for 20 years. It's more about what the chefs, I believe, think of as the consistency is important because you need to have a routine, the way you execute your food, whatever that might be, on a daily basis. And if you don't have that, whoever comes new in your kitchen will not find his way. And I think that's the key to consistency. If we talk about fat duck, it's a very great example about consistency. When I was in London in 2002, everybody was talking about fat duck, their menu, and then 10 years later, everybody was still talking about the menu, but the menu did not change. The menu just evolved into the scrambled egg ice cream, for example. Back in the time, it was just on the plate. Then it was in the eggshell, and then it was done tableside. And then, so the same dish, but it got to a point where it got 3 stars with the same menu when it had 1 star. But the ingredients were the same, but the presentation and the whole aspect was different. So that's a different level of consistency, but it's not the same menu.
Yeah, it's a consistent experience and vision. So what you're trying to do with Koloman is the same thing. You're trying to tell a story through your lens, and you have a vision, and you want this experience, and when you sit down there, there's a feeling. That feeling needs to be consistent throughout your food. The food might change, right? Maybe one day it's steelhead, but
for me, service is key in any restaurant. For me these days, chefs don't want to really hear that food is just it's a vital part. It has to be good anyway. There's no doubt. You have to know how to cook. But end of the day, I do think when Charlie back in the time said to me, it's 30%, a maximum 40% the food and the rest is service. And nobody wanted to hear that. But if you're really going to be great in the kitchen, you will never achieve more than 30 to 40% of the guest experience because the rest is just in front of the house. And when people are standing in front of house, how do people feel? And that what you just said is that feel when you want to see every day when you come in or every once in a month. You crave those feelings. The food can be different. It has to be good. But I do think when you walk into a dining room, you go there because that's the feeling you want to have again.
Yeah. Obviously, you mentioned that it's harder to find talented cooks nowadays. How do you create this culture in your kitchen, given that you have a different baseline of talent? How do you make sure that you're maintaining that sort of consistency, that like the cooks are up to your level of standards of quality? Like, how do you create that culture with the cooks that you have today?
I mean, first of all, I could have not opened this restaurant if I wouldn't have been in New York City for over 15 years. I really have to say this honestly, since the contacts I built over the years to open a restaurant was because of that. If I would have opened a restaurant as Markus Glocker and I would have never worked in the States, I would have failed miserably. And for one reason only, I could have never attracted the talent on a personal level because it's very personal now. You can post on Culinary Age as a job and say it's a well-paid job and come in, but that doesn't do much. You have to have a connection with the place. And to find the key members like this, to open a place with that kind of volume, there is no doubt you have to notice people. That's number one. So I was very lucky to have my former sous chefs from Batard and chef de parties from Batard moving with me into a different kind of role like management. That was the key. But in general, I would say there was a lot of abuse going on for a lot of years in the kitchens. And I think we're paying for it now. It's my opinion. Some people took it, some people didn't. I'm not complaining. I was in rough kitchens, we all were, and I enjoyed it because I liked the level of discipline. But some other people might not like it. So to find a middle ground now to build up the industry and be a little bit more human in the kitchen as well, to allow them making mistakes, that's something that obviously you can make a mistake, but just make sure that the chef on the pass doesn't let this mistake out in the dining room. So there has to be a police sort of, but nobody's perfect, The way we talk to each other in the kitchen has obviously changed and has to change. And we have to be now the mentors, the teachers, the workers, everything in one shot to make sure we get to the point where we can produce with our staff what we have and teach them as soon as possible to make sure the restaurant runs. Because there's not many people that coming in and say, okay, let's cook me the hollandaise, let's cook me this, let's cook me that. You have to physically explain that to them and teach them. And that's the process now we're in. I changed my management style quite drastically, to be honest. I feel it's a different position as a chef. But what I didn't change is like the end result. Maybe it might take a little bit longer, but the end result should be the same. And you should not lower your standards because you might not have the staff you need in the kitchen. Let's train them up and be focused that they have to learn as well what it means to be in the kitchen.
So you said you changed your style a bit, but like, are there any like rituals or like tactics that you have with the crew now that they go through when they're starting, or just throughout the kitchen, the things that you do to keep that sort of culture going?
Opportunity is for me the word I use a lot in the kitchen. Opportunity is where all of my management crew and anybody who wants to be in management has the opportunity to really grow. And I always say my goal is, and I'm not saying this because I don't want to be in the kitchen, I love to be in the kitchen. But if I don't come into the kitchen and I don't have to do anything besides we're setting up the service, tasting everything, and boom, you guys can do the service. This is the goal I have for me personally. And that's the goal everybody else should work behind me as well, that they're going to be in that position at one point. And to achieve this is purely management. It's really like putting the right people in the right positions, control, checking everything before the service starts, so you minimize any mistake beforehand, the mise en place, all those kind of things. And that's the management style I'm focusing on now. So I'm very personable. I'm not a shouter in the kitchen. I'm not like trying to intimidate anybody. Anybody can come to me any time of the day. I will never dismiss anybody. But when it comes down to service and we are ready to roll and then everything is wrong, I do not understand that. That's where I get a little irritated, because we have the whole day to make sure things are right. And then we're going to check the fortunes and we want to make sure we're going to set people up for success. And I do not have any sympathy to be on the pass as a chef or my sous chef and turn around to the meat prep and get loud to somebody when it's your own fault because you didn't check the mise en place to begin with. There's a certain trust level. You cannot just trust anybody right away, and you shouldn't. I think it's more like the old school methods of us back in the time as well when we cooked. I always check the fridges. It's very simple steps to set yourself up for success. Once you miss those steps, I think service goes south. Well, that's something I teach them, and I want to make sure that they have a routine to follow through in those points on a daily basis.
Obviously, as a cook, when we're coming up, yes, we learn how to cook, but probably one of the more important things we learn is mise en place and how to like create a prep list and manage everything that needs to get done in the 4-hour window before service starts, the ovens that you need to use and refrigerators, what needs to cool, and all the things you need to juice or cut or whatever.
Exactly.
Are you teaching that when someone that's green, that's never been in a kitchen before, and they now need to work a station that maybe before they wouldn't have worked? They're on hot apps now, or they're on Entremetier or something, and they maybe 5-10 years ago would not have been, but now there's not really a choice. How do you teach that today? How do you teach them how to understand mise en place and build a prep list and be ready on time?
The model is just a little bit different now in general. Like, I'm sure you were in the same boat as I was. I mean, we worked, I started at 7:01 in London and I left at 1 a.m. and I had a 20-minute break. So you did mise en place, you did lunch service, you did mise en place again, and then dinner service. And you every aspect of your station, which was quite nice, to be honest. Every quarter of your fridge, you knew what's going on, the amounts, the freshness, everything. But obviously nobody can work like this or shouldn't work like this anymore now. I think it's not right either. So now you have a different model in terms of having different shifts, and then the control of the management part goes really far because you need to control that the setup for every service or every meal period is done correctly. So I think this is really the biggest part, and then have the person who's doing the meal station being trained properly as well. I'm not a big believer of like, you're going to be there for one day with your partner, and then the next day you're going to be live. I don't think that's beneficial. You need to have at least 3 to 4 days with somebody, and it costs money. Of course, it costs money to run a training like this. But if you don't train them properly, I believe they're going to leave. After 2 or 3 weeks, they're going to be gone because they don't want to be in a position where they have no tools to succeed. And you have to give them those tools.
Do you think that menus are getting smaller now because we can't really produce as much food, be it with the teams, with the staff?
Absolutely. I think it's a big part. It's a big part of food costing. It's all those kind of things. But my first reaction to this was really when we talked about this restaurant. I said, like, I'm not going to open an Austrian restaurant or, for a matter of fact, a French Austrian restaurant and having 10 dishes on the menu with dessert. I'm not going to do this. This is not a restaurant for me. This is an afternoon tea. Maybe that sounds off, but when you go into a place like this, you expect sort of a couple of choices, It's very difficult, and it's a very difficult subject for investors and chefs and the team itself. But I do think you have to be very, very clever in terms of costing as well, in the way of how much labor you put in every dish. Or maybe that was something we didn't really think about back in the time. Now it's more than ever. How much labor goes into each dish? What's the timing? What's the food cost on it? What's the consistency level on it? Can be executed on a daily basis? All those things. It's not just cooking anymore.
This podcast is brought to you by Mies, the culinary operating system for food professionals. As a chef and restaurant owner for the past 20 years, I was frustrated that the only technology that we had in the kitchen was financial or inventory software. Those are important, but they don't address the actual process of cooking, training, collaboration, and consistent execution. So I decided if it didn't exist, I'd do my best to get it built, so the current and next generation of culinary pros have a digital tool dedicated to their craft. If you're a chef, mixologist, operator, or generally if you manage recipes intended for professional kitchens, Mies is built just for you. Organize, share, prep, and scale your recipes like never before, and get laser-accurate food cost and nutrition analysis faster than you could imagine. Learn more at www.getmies.com. And are you reevaluating those things often? So in your menu?
Every day.
Are there dishes that you've had to sort of take off or just completely change because there was just too much labor?
Yes, I was thinking about it. One huge mistake, I will example it, but hard was for me. We had this dish, which was an iconic dish, of the octopus pastrami. I wanted to have something visual. I knew Instagram is coming up at that time. It's like the biggest thing. So you needed something which is visual, interesting, has a story, and gives a big impact for any reviews in the future and for clientele to come back. So this dish was, I guess, back in the time, the dish was over 40% food cost. So I thought to myself at the beginning, it's going to be fun. There's other dishes that are going to balance it out. Guess what? People came in just for this dish, and the schnitzel and the milk bread with dessert we had on as well at Batard. So these 3 dishes are sold for, when I did 180 covers, I guarantee you I did about 80 octopus pastrami just as an appetizer. So my food cost was still totally out of control. I took it off. So you know what happened? So many people got upset. People didn't come back. And that was that. So I have a similar situation now with like salmon on croûte. I have a similar, cheese soufflé, those kind of things.
That salmon can't be easy to execute every day.
When you do 60, 70 of those main courses a day, you need one person or 1.5 people down in the prep area just to do the steak. So this is the backfire. But on the other side, we're still serving and selling other dishes as well. We're more balanced in our head at Batard. So it works out. But it's funny, you be careful what you wish for.
Well, this is part of like the innovator's dilemma, and it's tough in the food world. Yeah,
exactly.
You want to put out the most incredible product possible. But there's clearly barriers there. There didn't used to be, because you would, it was just, it was what it was. I mean, there was less barriers, but it was also meant there was not nearly as much, profit. It was probably a little bit less costly back in the day. And now it's so costly that you can't afford to. But I'm curious what you think about the outlook of innovation in the industry, knowing that like it is just much more difficult to create food that requires that level of effort.
Yes, I agree with you totally on that part. However, I do think as well the trend is not there right now for that type of food. In what we experienced back at El Bulli times, the Fat Duck, that kind of level of execution. I truly do believe this is not the right time to do a restaurant like that, because I think the trend is not there. I'm sure it's going to come back. It's like fashion. But right now, the way I see it, it's more, right now we're talking more about, back to the roots, honest food, identifying when the plate was actually on the plate. Those trends are very much there. And it's all about the ambience and actually feel of the restaurant more than just like the perfect dish, To execute that kind of creativity in what we saw back in the time, I do think in cities like New York, it's very difficult. Because if you really have no carte blanche, you really have to make sure it's financially viable. It's not that easy to cook like that anymore.
Well, it's a bit of a paradox too, because it's more expensive to operate in New York, but you do have a higher concentration of talent.
Yeah.
It's less expensive to operate in the outer markets, but there's a lower concentration of talent. So either way, it's
So what's the concept?
It's difficult either way.
Exactly.
So when you're creating food, like obviously you've had some very iconic dishes and you continue to, but when does something feel done? When is a dish out there? You were talking about Fat Duck, which is a great example of, for Heston, I don't think anything ever felt done for him. It was always a new iteration of something. It wasn't just sort of, on the menu for in perpetuity, but like for you, when you put something on the menu, when do you decide I'm not going to touch that anymore?
I never had that feeling in my life. I've never had the satisfaction of this. And when it's done for me, I mostly take it off the menu, because I will revisit it after a couple of years and maybe see it in a different light, the dish, Look, when I opened Koloman, the salmon dish I did in 1996 in Austria, in school, we had a dish which was a similarity to that salmon on croûte with a dish. So when I thought back about this, then I used that idea again, and that's what the salmon on croûte is now. So I do think it needs some maturity and age in our field sometimes to revisit dishes and change them into something where you're going to be happy again. But to say, this dish, that's it, this is gold, I never had that feeling.
I feel like this is another one of the innovator's dilemma, and also as a chef, so difficult, because just when something is at the apex of, okay, we've executed this just right, and we know that like now we can execute it all the time the same way, and everything is balanced perfectly, and the textures and the flavors, and this is it. So now we're done with this. And in reality, probably customers are like, no, that needs to stay on forever because we love that. And you're obviously like, well, no, I'm bored of that because we've done that. We've done that journey and we're done with it. But that's another sort of, trade-off that's really difficult, I think, with food, especially, at your level is, you get to a point where you're done with the dish, but maybe your guests are done with it.
I never understood this back in the time because we always wanted to change everything every 5 minutes as young cooks. But I do go to restaurants back just for one dish, I do that. I didn't understand it when I was young in my career because I thought it's boring, but I do go back for certain dishes. And I think, if you're going to think about Asian food, for example, you go there for the ramen, you go there for that one particular dish, and the menu doesn't change and nobody's upset. We in the French cooking world, we think we have to change everything every day just to be on point. I don't believe that's the case anymore. And not the whole menu, but the staple dishes you should. I know it's boring and it's hard to execute them every day, but if you change those kind of things, people might stay away.
But I think also it's not easy to create those sort of iconic dishes that are evergreen, that last forever. So if you can do that, if you're one of the, if you're the small percentage that can actually create staples that everybody wants to come back for all the time, I wonder if there's just an obligation.
There's not many chefs that actually have a signature dish, Your former boss, his short rib is iconic. It's timeless, But how many people do actually have a dish like this? People have their signature dishes, but mostly done it's a copy. Most of the time, it's something you saw somewhere else too in the same shape or form. But truly to have a dish which is visual and flavor-wise so unique, it's a timeless thing. There's not many people. I cannot tell you one single signature dish of Charlie Trotter. I can't, you know. But there's a reason behind it as well, because he changed the menu every day, and this was the thing to do.
Yeah, I think his approach wasn't to create signature dishes; it was just to continually evolve. You talked a little about Gray. You mentioned the short ribs. That was a collaboration with many chefs, Todd Humphreys, and I'm sure there's lots of other chefs involved with creating that dish. Like a lot of times, we look at these dishes and we assume just the chef came up with it in their brain and that's it. But oftentimes, our sous chefs, our CDCs are a big part of that. How do you involve your team in creating new dishes and innovating?
As of now, I would say, the opening menu was all my thought process and recipes and everything. But now it's time to, move away a little bit. And my sous chefs, my chef de cuisine, they are the creative parts now. They run this by me, and I tell them, for example, with white asparagus season, I would like to have white asparagus ice cream. I want to have rhubarb. I want to have strawberries. Can you do something with those flavors? That's my part. But they got to come up with the actual list. And that's exciting for me now as well, because I was on the other side for a very long time. And now it's exciting for them as well to say, okay, let's use those flavors and do something nice. That's my part now.
It's interesting. I always think about, when we're working for another chef, when you're working for Gordon or for Charlie, or I think back from working with Gray or at Boulet or something like that. And, and we're coming up with a dish. There's unfortunately, this sort of undocumented way this is how you're supposed to create the food in this restaurant. There's a subliminal thing there, subconscious, like, oh yeah, I know what I'm supposed to do so that this is a Cafe Gray dish, or this is a Gordon Ramsay London dish, or this is a Charlie Trotter dish. And we're doing that, but it's never like, here's how you're supposed to create food in my kitchen. I'm always curious about if you ever think about, now you have a team that's creating, specials, like creating the food in your kitchen. How do you think they envision creating food through the lens of Markus Glocker's kitchen?
I think it's coming back to what we talked before a little bit when I put my team together, that the key members you have to personally know. And I think that's a big factor. It's a brand, Koloman. It's, we try to move this into a brand, but at the same time, the food is so personal that they need to know me on a personal level to understand what I like and what I don't like. And nobody of my team will come up with a kiwi. They know I don't like kiwi. Those kind of things. They know. I think that's the most important thing. That the personal level of understanding of what they like. And what I do appreciate about my team is, especially the management, is like we talk about, hey, where did you go last night? Where did you go last week? Did you see anything new in terms of restaurants? What didn't you like about it? What did you like about it? And it's not about slagging somebody off because we didn't like the meal. It's more about, what did you learn out of this experience? Is this your style? Is it not your style? Would you do this in your own restaurant? Those things are very important.
I didn't know you didn't like kiwi, which is, I think kiwi is pretty delicious. But like, is there anything else?
Yeah, it's delicious. I would never do a dessert with kiwi, for example. This is something I probably...
Interesting. Why?
I would never do.
What is it about kiwi that you don't like?
It sounds crazy when I say it, but I just feel like it has nothing. Kiwi for breakfast, cut in half with a spoon. I love it. It's great. But to make something like a kiwi sorbet, which I had many pastry chefs trying to convince me about it, I would never do that. I cannot explain it. It's just
interesting.
A couple of ingredients. I'm not.
I remember one time we did a caramelized, like white pork glazed kiwi with foie gras. That was pretty delicious. There was something crunching there too, but I didn't know you didn't like kiwi. Anything else? Is there anything else that in your kitchen that like is?
Well, stop talking now.
No, it's just interesting. Is there anything else that you like that are like absolute no-goes or absolute? If you create a dish in Markus Glocker's kitchen, these are things that you have to consider, that you have to sort of keep in mind.
Green pepper. Would never use green pepper.
Green pepper, yeah,
never.
Yeah, I can say on that one.
I mean, I like peppers, all sorts of, but it's just like to use a large green pepper for something I would never. It will never cross my mind. It's weird in a lot of ways, but certain ingredients, it's even back in the time, like to use too much garlic was always a big thing for me for the sauces. I'm thinking differently now, but now it was a fine dining world back in the time. It was like garlic was sort of the enemy of balance in a lot of ways. And we're talking more about sauces, So it was like an ingredient like nutmeg in a lot of ways in Europe, the way to use garlic. I think it's delicious. Now you have to have some sort of a punch in there. But those were sort of the old school rules. I enjoyed them. I learned them. about them, but some things definitely stick in us.
Are there any ingredients that you go to a lot, whether it's like certain fortified wines or vinegars or things that like you tend to like dabble with a lot in your dishes?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like we work with Kracher wines for our Gelée, and then we have vinegars from Austria. We use Görles and we use some Naschmark vinegars as well. So those kinds of ingredients are delicious and great, but it's more about that they fit the concept and the flavor profile, since the flavor profile is great, obviously. But, the US has very similar products to that, some cases better ones. But it's more about the tradition, the story behind it, the reason I use those ingredients. But, I love Asian food. I love the whole flavor profile of umami. If I would do the next restaurant or fine dining restaurant in the future, I would definitely do some French and Japanese together. That would be, I think, if I would ever do a fine dining restaurant, that would be the case, since I really enjoyed my time at Charlie Trotters very much too, where this sort of thing was beautiful ingredients with French food together and give the umami flavor to the French food. I think Gray was a little bit down those lines as well in a lot of ways. It's very unique, and it's a beautiful way of cooking.
Yeah, I agree. Like there's not a lot of substitute for some of those, fish sauce, things like that. I don't see pumpkin seed oil on your menu much.
I do have that. I have it on the soup dish right now. We do have it on the cheesecake. We got it off.
Where do you find a really good pumpkin seed oil? I've only ever had like really good oil like overseas, but where do you find a really good pumpkin seed oil?
We just got it shipped over actually through Skoenig, a wine producer from Styria in Austria. And they gave us, I think, about like 30 cases for the whole year. But it's an incredible oil. I'm sure you know all the history about pumpkin seed oil, but they're really good ones with the salt level. You make an ice cream with it, you're making anything with it. It's really flavorful. And I used it mainly for the tafelspitz terrine I had on the menu, which was sort of with the vinaigrettes. I took the dish off, by the way, because it took me half a day just to make one terrine.
Yeah. And tafelspitz, traditionally, it's just like boiled beef, right?
This is, for example, the story behind this dish was, it's a true story. My dad and I went to church when I was young. We went to the local Gasthaus, and then you got the tafelspitz, and then the leftovers we took home. And then there was the broth and the meat, and then it jellified in the fridge. And then for dinner, we just sliced a couple onions, a piece of bread, and then you took this meat and the jellified broth on top of the toasted bread, and you ate this. This was delicious. A little pumpkin seed oil over the top. That was it. So I used that idea for this terrine, but it's basically cold cuts, and I binded it with the jellified consomme and carrots and, different cuts of meat, obviously sliced. And that was the idea behind it,
The story is just as important, sometimes as the food, because I think eating that dish, if you hear that first and then you eat that dish, it's a much different experience.
Yeah, it makes a difference. But, it's well of the type of restaurant you envision in Jove. And some people are not interested at all. They just want to make sure the food is good. And I do believe people walking into Koloman, they might just walk in there and bite to eat, but in some cases, they would like to know a little bit more.
Yeah, I think in general, human nature is, we are storytellers by nature. Sometimes it gets lost when we're, especially in New York, we're in a rush. But so you were talking about Eckhart, Weitzman, and obviously Trotter, but like, how have these chefs that you work for and any other chefs you can think of influenced? Are there any other times when you're doing something in the kitchen where you're cooking something and you're like, oh man, like this reminds me of, my time with Eckhart?
Oh yeah, absolutely. For sure. I still have those flavor profile sauces specifically. I think every European chef or anybody who trained in Europe has the fling of sauces, which is like such a big part of their cooking, the stocks and the sauces and the way you nurture the sauce and balance it and all the kind of things. So that's something I really learned from Eckhart. I remember like in Munich, we were young cooks and Eckhart was in the past and we had this real glass for the dish. And, for him, it was always, you had basically a reduction of white port wine, red port wine, nolly broth, then you had fresh celery juice, and then you had celery leaves. It was sort of the setup. Celery leaves to clean the sauce at the end, to infuse them, and then obviously garlic and more butter and thyme. And then the balance was always with the port, white, red, Madeira as well, and nolly broth. So this was sort of like the doctor putting the sauces together. When he said, okay, put more of this in there, and the meat cooks it. Oh yeah. And he didn't put anything in there, just put the sauce back on front. He could tell this like in a heartbeat. He turned around, just one more time, you're fired. He did it one more time, and he was gone. But there's not many chefs that actually can taste it. They say something and just to make a point to say something, but actually the flavor doesn't really change that much. This was something I really was mind blown by it. He tasted every nuance. That's pretty special. But that's what I learned from him. It's creative, it's fun, and it teaches you so much. And I really like that aspect of his approach in cooking. Talking Gordon Ramsay. Gordon Ramsay was a whole different animal. I think I learned a lot there too. I'm not about being creative, but more about being consistent in like seeing actually what you're able to do in one day. That's what I always say, because the workload was tremendous. And we had a great team, and it was a whole different aspect of it, and as well how to manage. I think that was a big part. Charlie Trotters was my greatest experience ever in terms of being creative. I really have to this day, I say, to receive a box of fish back in the time from the Skiji market, and it cost $4,000, and there's 3 fish in there, and he asked you to break one down, 23 years old. Not many people do that, to allow you to make the mistake as well. That kind of thing was really special, I would say.
Yeah, I definitely see a lot of him in your food for sure as well. So, just talking about inspirations, you're also, I don't know if many people know this, but you're a pretty incredible musician, at least piano player. I recall, well, I mean, it could have been the alcohol, but I recall some bachelor party we had where you ended up playing jazz piano at 2 a.m, and I'm like,
Martin Brock's bachelor.
I was like, holy shit, you're an incredible player. How much does music inspire like your cooking?
It's everything. I mean, for me, it's everything. It's a discipline. It's the orchestrating of instruments of flavors putting together. It's the teamwork. It's the fun. I always say musicians are, the most creative people in the world, but at the same time, they're a little rough around the edges. And I would say the same thing about cooks and chefs. It has such a big similarity. But the way I came up was my dad is a musician. He was a teacher. And he was playing for symphonics in Vienna. He was solo trumpets, classic and jazz as well. So he was a kind of a tough guy as well to make all his kids learn instruments. So we did. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. But when I started cooking, I sort of put the music aside. I enjoyed to play for fun, but I do think the music teaches me a lot how to put things together, and not just in cooking.
Do you still play?
I do play still. I have a piano, or like an electric piano at home. I do that, but trumpet is sort of done. But again, it teaches you a lot of things in life, music. And I think it's very important for a young individual to have access to music. It doesn't need to be a specific instrument, but just to be a part of something which plays together. I do think it's a very important lesson.
Yeah, I also think as a chef, or just any creative, I think it's important to have other outlets other than your primary medium to help you, sort of think outside the box.
Yeah, no, for sure. Absolutely. If you understand the whole piece of Bach, or like a piece of music which is different tempos, and actually, where I'm going with this, that this is the same for tasting menu. If you don't understand that, the progress of what you have to do and how you kind of starts with a forte. You kind of start like right away at the begin with this, because what's coming after. And those things, it's in music the same way. To build this up, and the best version of that I've seen in Munich, of Jans, when we start talking today, the 3-star guy who just got it yesterday, he understood that from top to the bottom, how to start and how to finish.
You talk about like understanding compositions to understand a tasting menu, but it's true. There's the premise of a crescendo and arpeggios and sort of building up and then bringing them back down. That is a tasting menu. That's exactly what you need to do. I would imagine that many people don't think of it that way, and you just sort of try to kill them from the start to the finish.
Yes, and just to put a couple dishes next to each other is not a tasting menu for me. What a tasting menu is, because we want to have a taste. I don't think that many people do understand this in our restaurant world right now. I think it's more like I'm giving 16 courses. They're all great dishes individually, but to make sense in one go.
So let me ask you, and this might be a strange one for you, but I've been thinking about it lately and been talking about it a little bit. But you're a talented chef and also a talented musician. But have you ever thought about why you cook, why you do what you do? And I'm going to sort of layer that on with how much of the joy that you derive from cooking. I know you love to cook. I know that that's part of it because you love to cook. But how much of the joy that you derive from cooking is from just the joy that you get from getting a pan in the heat and seasoning something or searing something and laying that piece of fish down, versus the reaction of somebody when they eat your food? And could you have the same amount of joy if you made that, like the perfect dish, but nobody ate it except you.
Yeah, there's a great saying. My old chef always said, like in Munich, Andreas Meyer, always said, like, obviously it's translated, maybe it doesn't make that much sense, but he also, just because you know how to cook it doesn't mean anybody knows how to eat it. What he meant by it is like, you're putting all these things on the plate, but it's great, awesome, but the people eat it don't understand it. To come back to your question, I think I thoroughly enjoyed cooking. I mean, everybody has their story when they first realized that's what they wanted to do. I had the same thing in Munich. The first time you teach me about slaughter, like caviar, is the first time those experiences I had to taste. But for me, it was always the human factor so important. I was lucky to work with people. They took me under their wing, and I think that's something I really appreciated. The mentorship was so big that I could not let them down. So that's why. And then when you get better and better and go to different restaurants, that sort of becomes an obsession as well in a lot of ways. For me now, when I stand in the kitchen, what really satisfies me is more like the human part than the food these days. It's the guests, absolutely, but it's at the same time, I like the people they are in this industry. I do enjoy working with them. It's from the academic to the person who has a hard upcoming. It's everybody's in one sort of environment. And there's not many places you enjoy this except in music. Music is all similar for that. But in other professions, you might sitting next to your equal all the time because that's just the standard and who has to work in a place like this. To begin with, it was all about food for sure. Getting older, I enjoyed the people I work with. I still do this very much to this day. But I really enjoy this as well. But they have fun and they enjoy themselves in the kitchen and see the immediate reaction from me, obviously. But as well, with an open kitchen like this, there's no place to hide, There's no place to hide. And sometimes if a mistake is happening for whatever reason, when we step aside and say, it's difficult to cook, as a joke, obviously. But, there's no place to hide. So you have to take with a grain of salt. But I do think that's the satisfaction of our business.
The people that you work with, just as much as
the people you work with.
So if you hypothetically had a kitchen where you could cook whatever you wanted and you had all the team that you wanted and you could cook anything that you wanted every single day, let's just say money didn't matter, like you could buy whatever you wanted, but no guests ate the food, would you still feel like you get derive the same joy?
No. And I say this now as well, like everybody dreamed of having carte blanche, like as a chef, and you have an investor who doesn't care about money and does everything for you, and all you have to do is like cutting the center cut of salmon and the middle part of the duck and nothing else matters. But the root of this is deeper. I mean, if that satisfies you as a chef, that will satisfy you maybe for a short period of time. But as soon as your conscience kicks in and we're talking about waste, we're talking about anything to save the planet, and then you as a chef work like this, it just doesn't make sense anymore. It never made sense, by the way, but I do think that's a big part of it. And money is another thing, I truly believe if you open a restaurant and there's no money to be made, how satisfying is it? I mean, and it's not even about the money when I'm saying this. It's more about, are you doing something right? Are you doing the correct thing? Because if you find somebody in the kitchen, you shouldn't allow them to be successful in the future, not, oh, you work for Markus Glocker, so everything goes, that's my vision behind it.
I think that's the interesting thing about food. I'm sure there's other industries like this, but it's so obviously art and craft and commerce, because it doesn't work just as art. It doesn't work just as craft, and it doesn't work just as commerce. Maybe sometimes that's happening today that's more unfortunate, but I think that's the beauty of what you do.
When you get older, it just certain things aggravate me so much. Waste is something it really aggravates me more and more. Obviously, we're getting older. I think that's a big part of it. But it's just unnecessary waste or like carelessness, doing things twice for no reason. Those kind of things to me aggravate me.
Well, we're wrapping up here, man. But is there anything else you want to share with the audience, cooks, the chefs out there, the restaurateurs?
What I want to share is I say this from the bottom of my heart, and this is for the younger generation and the young cooks. They might saying, should I go into this field or not? I think it's the right time right now to go into this field. There's money to be made because I think we are sort of in the 80s back in New York. We have this one only chance in this industry to really be successful if you are putting the work in. And it is a great industry. It's very satisfying if you are serious what you do. And I think you have to be serious what you do in any other job as well. Why not in hospitality? And I'm 42 years old. I'm still excited what I'm doing, and I'm still all in it. I'm romanticizing the hospitality industry still to this day. But the younger generation we need, and I just wanted to make sure as well that all our generation pulls in the same swing to make sure we're going to bring these people back and show them what this business is all about. And maybe have the same feeling as well what you and me, Shaki, had, 25 years ago when we were cooking, the same fun to relate this message again. This is our job now.
Yeah. Well, I love that you are taking that on, that responsibility, because if you don't, who does? And I agree. I appreciate you saying that. This is the right time. This is a great time to start cooking and getting into this career. So, Mr. Markus, it's always a pleasure, man. Good seeing you. I have to come back in soon. My wife and I had an incredible anniversary dinner there.
Always a pleasure with you.
Thanks for tuning into the Mies podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist, Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmees.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with your fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.